Sartor Resartus by Thomas Carlyle. Chapter 1. Preliminary. Considering our present advanced state of culture and how the torch of science has now been brandished and borne about, with more or less effect, for 5,000 years and upwards, how, in these times especially, not only the torch still burns, and perhaps more fiercely than ever, but innumerable rushlights and sulphur matches, kindled thereat, are also glancing in every direction, so that not the smallest cranny or dog-hole in nature or art can remain unilluminated. It might strike the reflected active fiji, bulbulid hide and mop for bod, sort of thing. Our theory of gravitation is as good as perfect. Lagrange, it is well known, has proved that the planetary system on this scheme will endure forever. Laplace, still more cunningly, even guesses that it could not have been made on any other scheme, whereby, at least, our nautical logbooks can be better kept, and water transport of all kinds has grown more commodious, of geology and geognosy. We know enough, what with the labors of our Werners and Huttons, what with the ardent genius of their disciples, it has come about that now, to many a royal society, the creation of a world is little more mysterious than the cooking of a dumpling, concerning which last, indeed, there have been minds to whom the question, how the apples were got in, presented difficulties. Why mention our disquisitions on the social contract, on the standard of taste, on the migrations of the herring? Then have we not a doctrine of rent, a theory of value, philosophies of language, of history, of pottery, of apparitions, of intoxicating liquors? Man's whole life and environment have been laid open and elucidated. Scarcely a fragment or fiber of his soul, body, and possessions, but has been probed, dissected, distilled, desiccated, and scientifically decomposed. Our spiritual faculties, of which it appears there are not a few, have their Stuarts, cousins, Royer Collards, every cellular, muscular tissue, glories, and its Lawrences, Bichats. How then comes it, may the reflective mind repeat, that the grand tissue of all tissue should have been quite overlooked by science, the vestural tissue, namely of woolen or other cloth, which man's soul wears as its outmost wrappage and overall, wherein his whole other tissues are included and screened, his whole faculties work, his whole self lives, moves, and has its being. For if, now and then, some straggling broken thing in all speculations they have tacitly figured man as a clothed animal, whereas he is by nature a naked animal, and only in certain circumstances, by purpose and device, masks himself in clothes. Shakespeare says, "We are creatures that look before and after, the more surprising that we do not look round a little and see what is passing under our very eyes." But here, as in so many other cases, Germany, learned, indefatigable, deep-thinking Germany, comes to our aid. It is, after all, a blessing that in these revolutionary times there should be one country where abstract thought can still take shelter, that while the din and frenzy of Catholic emancipations and rotten boroughs and revolts of Paris deafen every French and every English ear, the German can stand peaceful on his scientific watchtower, and to the raging, struggling multitude here and elsewhere, solemnly, from hour to hour, with preparatory beliefs that you get not infrequently the Germans have been blamed for an unprofitable diligence, as if they struck into devious courses where nothing was to be had but the toil of a rough journey, as if, forsaking the gold mines of finance and that political slaughter of fat oxen whereby a man himself grows fat, they were apt to run goose hunting into regions of bileberries and crowberries, and be swallowed up at last in remote peat bogs. Of that unwise science which, as our humorist expresses it, by geometric scale doth take the size of pots of ale, still more, of that altogether misdirected industry, which is seen vigorously thrashing mere straw, there can nothing defensive be said. In so far as the Germans are chargeable with such, let them take the consequence. Nevertheless, be it remarked that even a Russian steppe has tumult and gold ornaments. Also many a scene that looks desert and rock bound from the distance will unfold itself when visited into rare valleys. Nay, in any case, would criticism erect not only finger-posts and turnpikes, but spiked gates and impassable barriers for the mind of man? It is written, "Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased." Surely the plain rule is, let each considerate person have his way, and see what it will lead to. For not this man and that man, but all men make up mankind, and their united tasks, the task of mankind. How often have we seen some such adventurous and perhaps much censured wanderer light on some outlying, neglected, yet vitally momentous province, the hidden treasures of which he first discovered, and kept proclaiming till the general eye and effort were directed thither and the conquest was completed, thereby in these his seemingly so aimless rambles, planting new standards, founding new habitable colonies in the immeasurable circumambient realm of nothingness, and nightwise men, was he who counseled that speculate should have for freight. Perhaps it is proof of the stunted condition in which pure science, especially pure moral science, languishes among us English, and how our mercantile greatness and invaluable constitution, impressing a political or other immediately practical tendency on all English culture and endeavor, cramps the pre-flight of thought, that this not philosophy of clothes, but recognition even that we have no such philosophy, stands here for the first time published in our language. What English intellect could have chosen such a topic, or by chance stumbled on it? But for that same unshackled and even sequestered condition of the German learned, which permits and induces them to fish in all manner of waters, with all manner of nets, it seems probable enough this abstruse inquiry might, in spite of the results it leads to, have continued dormant for indefinite periods. The editor of these sheets, though otherwise boasting himself a man of confirmed speculative habits, and perhaps discursive enough, is free to confess that never till these last months did the above very plain considerations on our total want of a philosophy of clothes occur to him, and then, by quite foreign suggestion, by the arrival, namely, of a new book from Professor Teufelsdröckh of Weissnich too, treating expressly of this subject, and in a style which, whether understood or not, could not even by the blindest be overlooked. In the present editor's way of thought, this remarkable treatise, with its doctrines, whether as judicially acceded to or judicially denied, has not remained without effect. Die Kleider, ihr Verden und Wirken Clothes, their origin and influence, von Diogenes Teufelsdröckh, J.U.D., etc. Stillschweigen und Konje, Wiesniji, Wiesnichtweg and Konje. Weissnichttu, 1831. Here, says the Weissnichttuschen Anzeiger, comes a volume of that extensive, close-printed, close-meditated sort, which, be it spoken with pride, is seen only in Germany, perhaps only in Weissnichttu. Issuing from the hitherto irreproachable firm of Stillschweigen and Company, with every external furtherance, it is of such internal quality as to set neglect at defiance. A work, concludes the well-nigh enthusiastic reviewer, interesting alike to the antiquary, the historian, and the philosophic thinker, a masterpiece of boldness, lynx-eyed acuteness, and rugged independent Germanism and philanthropy.
der Berühmtheit unmenschlich, which will not, assuredly, pass current without opposition in high places, but must and will exalt the almost new name of Teufelsdröckh to the first ranks of philosophy in our German temple of honor. Mindful of old friendship, the distinguished professor in this the first blaze of his fame, which however does not dazzle him, sends hither a presentation copy of his book, with compliments and encomiums, which modesty forbids the present editor to rehearse, yet without indicated wish or hope of any kind, except what may be implied in the concluding phrase, "Mochte es this remarkable treatise auch im Brittengede Thaddean." Chapter 2. Editorial Difficulty said. If for a speculative man, whose seed field, in the sublime words of the poet, is time, no conquest is important, but that of new ideas, then might the arrival of Professor Teufelsdröck's book be marked with chalk in the editor's calendar. It is indeed an extensive volume of boundless, almost formless contents, a very sea of thought, neither calm nor clear, if you will, yet wherein the toughest pearl diver may dive to his utmost depth, and return not only with sea wreck, but with true orients. Directly on the first perusal, almost on the first deliberate inspection, it became apparent that here a quite new branch of philosophy, leading to as yet undescribed ulterior results, was disclosed. Farther, what seemed scarcely less interesting, a quite new human individuality, an almost unexampled personal character, that, namely, of Professor Teufelsdröckh the Discloser. Of both which novelties, as far as might be possible, we resolved to master the significance. But as man is emphatically a proselytizing creature, no sooner was such mastery even fairly attempted than the new question arose, how might this acquired good be imparted to others? Perhaps an equal need thereof. How could the philosophy of clothes and the author of such philosophy be brought home, in any measure, to the business and bosoms of our own English nation? For if new got gold is said to burn the pockets till it be cast forth into circulation, much more may new truth. Here, however, difficulties occurred. The first thought naturally was to publish article after article on this remarkable volume in such widely circulating critical journals as the editor might stand connected with, or by money or love procure access to. But, on the other hand, was it not clear that such matter as must here be revealed and treated of might endanger the circulation of any journal extant? If, indeed, all party divisions in the state could have been abolished, Whig, Tory, and Radical, embracing in discrepant union, and all the journals of the nation could have been jumbled into one journal, and the philosophy of clothes poured forth in incessant torrents therefrom, the attempt had seemed possible. But alas, what vehicle of that sort have we except Fraser's Magazine? A vehicle all strewed, figuratively speaking, with the maddest Waterloo crackers, exploding distractively and destructively wheresoever the mystified passenger stands or sits, nay, in any case understood to be, of late years, a vehicle full to overflowing and inexorably shut. Besides, to state the philosophy of clothes without the philosopher, the ideas of Teufelsdröckh without something of his personality, was it not to ensure both of entire misapprehension? Now for biography, had it been otherwise admissible, there were no adequate documents, no hope of obtaining such, but rather, owing to circumstances, a special despair. Thus did the editor see himself, for the while, shut out from all public utterance of these extraordinary doctrines, and constrained to revolve them, not without disquietude, in the dark depths of his own mind. So had it lasted for some months, and now the volume on clothes, read and again read, was in several points becoming lucid and lucent, the personality of its author more and more surprising, but, in spite of all that memory and conjecture could do, more and more enigmatic. whereby the old disquietude seemed fast settling into fixed discontent, when altogether unexpectedly arrives a letter from Herr Hofrath Hischricke, our professor's chief friend and associate in Weistu, with whom we had have nightpotnight. The Hofrat, after much quite extraneous matter, began dilating largely on the agitation and attention which the philosophy of clothes was exciting in its own German Republic of Letters, on the deep significance and tendency of his friend's volume, and then, at length, with great circumlocution, hinted at the practicability of conveying some knowledge of it and of him to England, and through England to the distant West. A work on Professor Teufelsdröckh were undoubtedly welcome to the family, the National, or any other those. Patriotic libraries, at present the glory of British literature, might work revolutions in thought, and so forth. In conclusion, intimating not obscurely that should the present editor feel disposed to undertake a biography of Teufelsdröckh, he, Hofrath Hischricke, had it in his power to furnish the requisite documents, as in some chemical mixture that has stood long evaporating but would not crystallize. Instantly, when the wire or other fixed substance is introduced, crystallization commences and rapidly proceeds till the whole is finished. So was it with the editor's mind, and this offer of Hischricke's form rose out of void solution and discontinuity, like united itself with like and definite arrangement, and soon either in actual vision and possession, or in fixed reasonable hope, the image of the whole enterprise had shaped itself, so to speak, into a solid mass. Cautiously yet courageously, through the twopenny post, application to the famed redoubtable Other was now made. An interview with that singular man have taken place, with more of assurance on our side, with less of satire, at least of open satire on his, than we anticipated. For the rest, with such issue as is now visible. As to those same patriotic libraries, the Hofrat's counsel could only be viewed with silent amazement. But with his offer of documents we joyfully and almost instantaneously closed. Thus, too, in the sure expectation of these, we already see our task begun, and this our Sartor Resartus, which is properly a life and opinions of Herr Teufelsdröckh, hourly advancing, of our fitness for the enterprise, to which we have such title and vocation. It were perhaps uninteresting to say more. Let the British reader study and enjoy, in simplicity of heart, what is here presented him, and with whatever metaphysical acumen and talent for meditation he is possessed of. Let him strive to keep a free, open sense, cleared from the mists of prejudice, above all from the paralysis of cant, and directed rather to the book itself than to the editor of the book. Who or what such editor may be must remain conjectural and even insignificant. NTPL. It is a voice publishing tidings of the philosophy of clothes. Undoubtedly a spirit addressing spirits. Whoso hath ears, let him hear. With us even he still communicates in some sort of mask or muffler, and, we have reason to think, under a feigned name. Oh! On one other point the editor thinks it needful to give warning, namely, that he is animated with a true, though perhaps a feeble attachment to the institutions of our ancestors, and minded to defend these, according to ability, at all hazards. Nay, it was partly with the view to such defense that he engaged in this undertaking. To stem, or if that be impossible, profitably to divert the current of innovation, such a volume as Teufelsdröck's, if cunningly planted down, were no despicable pile or floodgate in the logical ware. For the rest, be it not disapprehended that any personal connection of ours with Teufelsdröckh had Hischricke, or this philosophy of clothes, can pervert our judgment or sway us to extenuate or exaggerate. powerless, we venture to promise, are those private compliments themselves. Grateful they may well be, as generous illusions of friendship, as fair mementos of bygone unions, of those nights and suppers of the gods, when, lapped in the symphonies and harmonies of philosophic eloquence, though with baser accompaniments, the present editor reveled in that feast of reason never since vouchsafed him in so full measure. But what then? Amicus Plato, magis amica veritas. Teufelsdröckh is our friend, truth is our divinity. In our historical and critical capacity, we hope we are strangers to all the world, have feud or favor with no one, save indeed the devil, with whom, as with the prince of lies and darkness, we do at all times wage internecine war. This assurance, at an epoch when puffery and quackery have reached a height unexampled in the annals of mankind, and even English editors, like Chinese shopkeepers, must write on their door lintels, no cheating. Here, white crowls, we thought it good to premise. Chapter 3. Reminiscence. To the author's private circle, the appearance of this singular work on clothes must have occasioned little less surprise than it has to the rest of the world. For ourselves, at least, few things have been more unexpected. Professor Teufelsdröckh, at the period of our acquaintance with him, seemed to lead a quite still and self-contained life, a man devoted to the higher philosophies indeed, yet more likely, if he published at all, to publish a refutation of Hegel and Bardili, both of whom, strangely enough, he included under a common ban, than to descend, as he has here done, into the angry noisy forum with an argument that cannot but exasperate and divide. Not, that we can remember, was the philosophy of clothes once touched upon between us. If through the high, silent, meditative transcendentalism of our friend we detected any practical tendency whatever, it was at most political, and towards a certain perspective, and for the present quite speculative, radicalism, as indeed some correspondence on his part with Herr Oken of Jena was now and then, suspected, though his special contributions to the ISIS could never be more than surmised at. But at all events, nothing moral, still less anything didactico-religious was looked for from him. Well do we recollect the last words he spoke in our hearing, which indeed, with the night they were uttered in, are to be forever remembered. Lifting his huge tumbler of Gukug, and for a moment lowering his tobacco pipe, he stood up in full coffee-house. It was Zur Grünen Gans, the largest in Wisnich too, where all the virtuosity and nearly all the intellect of the place assembled of an evening, and there, with low soul-stirring tone and the look truly of an angel, the whether of a white or of a black one might be dubious, proposed this toast: Disaster Armen in Gupka's Nupels Nevapur, in heaven's name, et Dosh de Bellis. One full shout, breaking the leaden silence, then a gurgle of innumerable emptying bumpers, again followed by universal cheering, returned him loud acclaim. It was the finale of the night resuming their pipes, in the highest enthusiasm amid volumes of tobacco smoke. Triumphant, cloud-capped without, and within, the assembly broke up, each to his thoughtful pillow. Blipto high indictier spas Galgen Vogel, said several, meaning thereby that, one day, he would probably be hanged for his democratic sentiments. Wohl steekt dort der Schuck, added they, looking round, but Teufelsdröckh had retired by private alleys, and the compiler of these pages beheld him no more. Gukuk is unhappily only an academical beer. In such scenes has it been our lot to live with his philosopher, such estimate to form of his purposes and powers. And yet, thou brave Teufelsdröckh, who could tell what lurked in thee? Under those thick locks of thine, so long and lank, overlapping roof-wise the gravest space we ever in this world saw, there dwelt a most busy brain. In thy eyes, too, deep under their shaggy brows and looking out, so still and dreamy, have we not noticed gleams of an ethereal, or else a diabolic fire, and half fancied that their stillness was but the rest of infinite motion? the sleep of a spinning top? Thy little figure, there as, in loose ill-brushed threadbare habiliments, thou sattest amid litter and lumber, whole days to think and smoke tobacco, held in it a mighty heart. The secrets of man's life were laid open to thee. Thou sawest into the mystery of the universe farther than another. Thou hadst in petto thy remarkable volume on clothes. Nay, was there not in that clear logically founded transcendentalism of thine, still more in thy meek, silent, deep-seated sansculottism, combined with a true princely courtesy of inward nature, the visible rudiments of such speculation? But great men are too often unknown, or what is worse, misknown. Already, when we dreamed not of it, the warp of thy remarkable volume lay on the loom, and silently, mysterious shuttles were putting in the woof. How the Hofrath hierarchy is to furnish biographical data, in this case, may be a curious question, the answer of which, however, is happily not our concern, but his. To us it appeared, after repeated trial, that in vice niche to, from the archives or memories of the best informed classes, no biography of Teufelsdröckh was to be gathered, not so much as a false one. He was a stranger there, wafted thither by what is called the course of circumstances, concerning whose parentage, birthplace, prospects, or pursuits, curiosity had indeed made inquiries, but satisfied herself with the most indistinct replies. For himself he was a man so still and altogether unparticipating, that to question him even afar off on such particulars was a thing of more than usual delicacy. Besides, in his sly way, he had ever some quaint turn, not without its satirical edge, wherewith to divert such intrusions, and deter you from the like. Wit spoke of him secretly as if he were a kind of Melchizedek, without father or mother of any kind, sometimes with reference to his great historic and statistic knowledge, and the vivid way he had of expressing himself, like an eyewitness of distant transactions. And scenes. They called him the Eviju Jude, everlasting, or as we say, wandering Jew. To the most, indeed, he had become not so much a man as a thing, which thing doubtless they were accustomed to see, and with satisfaction, but no more thought of accounting for than for the fabrication of their daily Allgemeine Zeitung, or the domestic habits of the Sun. Both were there, and welcome. The world enjoyed what good was in them, and thought no more of the matter. The man Teufelsdröckh passed and repassed in his little circle as one of those originals and nondescripts, more frequent in German universities than elsewhere, of whom, though you see them alive, and feel certain enough that they must have a history, no history seems to be discoverable, or only such as men give of mountain rocks and antediluvian ruins, that they have been created by unknown agencies, are in a state of gradual decay, and for the present reflect and reased, waar vislet, ever as be it quite. It's a precious goodbye. World, where so much other mystery is. It was to be remarked that though, by title and diploma, Professor der allerlei Wissenschaft, or as we should say in English, Professor of Things in General, he had never delivered any course, perhaps never been incited thereto by any public furtherance or requisition. To all appearance, the Amiten government of Weissnichtschua, in founding their new university, imagined they had done enough if, in times like ours, as the half-official program expressed it, when all things are, rapidly or slowly, resolving themselves into chaos, a professorship of this kind had been established, whereby, as occasion called, the task of bodying somewhat forth again from such chaos might be, even slightly, facilitated. That actual lectures should be held, and public classes for the science of things in general, they doubtless considered premature, on which ground too they had only established a professorship, nor wise endowed it, so that Teufelsdröckh, recommended by the highest names, had been promoted, thereby to a name merely. Great among the more enlightened classes was the admiration of this new professorship, how an enlightened government had seen into the want of the age Zeitbedürfnis, how at length, instead of denial and destruction, we were to have a science of affirmation and reconstruction, and Germany and Weisnitz too were where they should be, in the vanguard of the world. Considerable also was the wonder at the new professor, dropped upon Mlamith into the nascent university, so all able to lecture, houden kooit tolkaged, hold the artifethigites up at. But such admiration and such wonder, being followed by no act to keep them living, could last only 9 days, and long before our visit to that scene had quite died away. The more cunning heads thought it was all an expiring clutch at popularity on the part of a minister whom domestic embarrassments, court intrigues, old age, and dropsy soon afterwards finally drove from the helm. As for Teufelsdröckh, except by his nightly appearances at the Grüne Gans, Weisnitz too saw little of him, felt little of him. Here, over his tumbler of Gukuk, he sat reading journals, sometimes contemplatively looking into the clouds of his tobacco pipe without other visible employment, always, from his mild ways, an agreeable phenomenon there, more especially when he opened his lips for speech, on which occasions the whole coffee-house would hush itself into silence, as assured to hear something noteworthy, nay, perhaps to hear a whole series and river of the most memorable utterances, such as, when once thawed, he would for hours indulge in, with fit audience, and the more memorable, as issuing from a head apparently not more interested in them, not more conscious of them, than is the sculptured stone head of some public fountain, which through its brass-mouthed tube emits water to the worthy and the unworthy, careless whether it be for cooking victuals or quenching. Conflagrations, indeed, maintains the same earnest, assiduous look, whether any water be flowing or not. To the editor of these sheets, as to a young enthusiastic Englishman, however unworthy, Teufelsdröckh opened himself perhaps more than to the most. Pity only that we could not then half guess his importance and scrutinize him with due power of vision. We enjoyed, what not 3 men Weisnitz could boast of, a certain degree of access to the professor's private domicile. It was the attic floor of the highest house in the Wangos, and might truly be called the pinnacle of Weisnitz too, for it rose sheer up above the contiguous roofs, themselves rising from elevated ground. Moreover, with its windows, it looked towards all the foreort, or as the Scotch say, and we ought to say erts, the sitting room itself commanded 3. Another came to view in the Schlafgemach bedroom at the opposite end, to say nothing of the kitchen, which offered 2, as it were, duplicates, showing nothing new. So that it was. In fact, the speculum or watchtower of Teufelsdröckh, wherefrom, sitting at ease, he might see the whole live circulation of that considerable city, the streets and lanes of which, with all their doing and driving, thunning treiben, when treiben, were for the most part visible there. I looked down into all that wasp nest or beehive, we have heard him say, and witnessed their wax laying and honey making and poison brewing and choking by sulphur. From the palace esplanade, where music plays while Serene Highness is pleased to eat his victuals, down to the low lane, where in her door-sill the aged widow, knitting for a thin livelihood, sits to feel the afternoon sun, I see it all, for except Schlosskirche weathercock, no biped stands so high. Couriers arrive bestrapped and bebooted, bearing joy and sorrow bagged up in pouches of leather, there, top-laden, and with 4 swift horses, rolls in the country Baron and his household. Here, on timber leg, the lamed soldier hops painfully along, begging alms 1,000 carriages and wains, cars come tumbling in with food. With young rusticity and other raw produce, inanimate or animate, and go tumbling out again with produce manufactured. That living flood, pouring through these streets of all qualities and ages, knowest thou whence it is coming, whither it is going? Aus der Ewigkeit, zu der Ewigkeit hin. From eternity onwards to eternity, onwards to eternity. These are apparitions. What else? Are they not souls rendered visible in bodies that took shape and will lose it, melting into air? Their solid pavement is a picture of the sense. They walk on the bosom of nothing. Blank time is behind them and before them. Or fanciest thou, the red and yellow clothes screen yonder, with spurs on its heels and feather in its crown, is but of today, without a yesterday or a tomorrow, and had not rather its ancestor alive when Hengst and Horsa overran thy island? Friend, thou seest here a living link in that tissue of history which enweaves all. Being, watch well, or it will be past thee, and seen no more. Ach, mein Lieber, said he once at midnight when we had returned from. The coffee house in rather earnest talk. It is a true sublimity to dwell here. These fringes of lamplight, struggling up through smoke and thousand-fold exhalation, some fathoms into the ancient reign of night. What thinks Boots of them, as he leads his hunting dogs over the zenith in their leash of sidereal fire? That stifled hum of midnight, when traffic has lain down to rest, and the chariot wheels of vanity, still rolling here and there through distant streets, are bearing her to halls roofed in and lighted to the due pitch for her, and only vice and misery, to prowl or to moan like night birds, are abroad. That hum, I say, like the stertorous, unquiet slumber of sick life, is heard in heaven. Oh, under that hideous coverlet of vapors and putrefactions and unimaginable gases, what a fermenting vat lies simmering and hid! The joyful and the sorrowful are there. Men are dying there. Men are being born. Men are praying. On the other side of a brick partition, men are cursing. And around them all is the vast void, night. The proud grandee still lingers in his perfumed saloons or reposes within damask curtains. Wretchedness cowers into buckled beds, or shivers, hunger-stricken, into its lair of straw. In obscure cellars, rouge et noir languidly emits its voice of destiny to haggard, hungry villains, while councillors of state sit plotting and playing their high chess game, whereof the pawns are men. The lover whispers his mistress that the coach is ready, and she, full of hope and fear, glides down to fly with him over the borders. The thief, still more silently, sets to his picklocks and crowbars, or lurks in wait till the watchmen first snore in their boxes. Gay mansions, with supper rooms and dancing rooms, are full of light and music and high-swelling hearts. But in the condemned cells, the pulse of life beats tremulous and faint, and bloodshot eyes look out through the darkness, which is around and within, for the light of a stern last morning. 6 men are to be hanged on the morrow. Comes no hammering from the Rebentine? Their gallows must even now be a-building. Upwards of 500,000 two-legged animals without feathers lie round us in horizontal position, their heads all in nightcaps, and full of the foolishest dreams. Riot cries aloud, and staggers and swaggers in his rank dens of shame, and the mother, with streaming hair, kneels over her pallid dying infant, whose cracked lips only her tears now moisten. All these heaped and huddled together, with nothing but a little carpentry and masonry between them, crammed in, like salted fish in their barrel, or weltering, shall I say, like an Egyptian pitcher of tamed vipers, each struggling to get its head above the others. Such work goes on under that smoke counterpane. But I, mean Werther, sit above it all. I am alone with the stars. We looked in his face to see whether, in the utterance of such extraordinary night thoughts, no feeling might be traced there. But with the light we had, which indeed was only a single tallow light, and far enough from the window, nothing save that old calmness and fixedness was visible. These were the professor's talking seasons. Most commonly he spoke in mere monosyllables, or sat altogether silent and smoked, while the visitor had liberty either to say what he listed, receiving for answer an occasional grunt, or to look round for a space and then take himself away. It was a strange apartment, full of books and tattered papers, and miscellaneous shreds of all conceivable substances, united in a common element of dust. Books lay on tables and below tables. Here fluttered a sheet of manuscript, there a torn handkerchief or nightcap hastily thrown aside. Ink bottles alternated with bread crusts, coffee pots, tobacco boxes, periodical literature, and blucher boots. Old Lycian Lessican, Lisa, who was his bedmaker and stove-lighter, his washer and wringer, cook, errand-maid, and general Lyons provider, and for the rest a very orderly creature, had no sovereign authority in this last citadel of Teufelsdröckh. Only some once in the month she half forcibly made her way thither, with broom and duster, and Teufelsdröckh, hastily saving his manuscripts, effected a partial clearance, a jail. Delivery of such lumber as was not literary. These were earthquakes, which Teufelsdröckh dreaded worse than the pestilence. Nevertheless, to such length he had been forced to comply. Glad would he have been to sit here philosophizing forever, or till the litter, by accumulation, drove him out of doors, but Lycian was his right arm and spoon, and necessary of life, and would not be flatly gainsaid. We can still remember the ancient woman, so silent that some thought her dumb. Deaf also you would often have supposed her, for Teufelsdröckh and Teufelsdröckh only would she serve or give heed to, and with him she seemed to communicate chiefly by signs, if it were not rather by some secret divination that she guessed all his wants and supplied them. Assiduous old dame! She scoured and sorted and swept in her kitchen with the least possible violence to the ear, yet all was tight and right there. Hot and black came the coffee, ever at the due moment, and the speechless Lycian herself looked out on you from under her clean white coif with its lappets. To her clean withered face and wrinkles, with a look of helpful intelligence, almost of benevolence. Few strangers, as above hinted, had admittance hither. The only one we ever saw there, ourselves excepted, was the Hofrath Heischkricke, already known by name and expectation to the readers of these pages. To us, at that period, Herr Heischkricke seemed one of those purse-mouthed, crane-necked, clean-brushed, pacific individuals, perhaps sufficiently distinguished in society by this fact that, in dry weather or in wet, they never appear without their umbrella. Had we not known with what little wisdom the world is governed, and how, in Germany as elsewhere, the 99 public men can for most part be but mute train-bearers to the 100th, perhaps but stalking horses and willing or unwilling dupes, it might have seemed wonderful how Herr Heischkricke should be named a Rath, or counselor, and counselor even in Weissnich too. What counsel to any man, or to any woman, could this particular? Hofrath give, in whose loose zigzag figure, in whose thin visage, as it went jerking to and fro, in minute incessant fluctuation, you traced rather confusion worse confounded, at most, timidity and physical cold? Some indeed said withal he was the very spirit of love embodied. Blue earnest eyes, full of sadness and kindness, purse ever open, and so forth, the whole of which we shall now hope, for many reasons, was not quite groundless. Nevertheless,
friend Teufelsdröck's outline, who indeed handled the burren like few in these cases, was probably the best. Had gemoed und geest, had wanigstens gehabt, durch on organ, een, hitchig sales, goen wartig, ever halber zerd, hittikend wartig, ever halber start, halberst. He has heart and talent, at least has had such, yet without fit mode of utterance or favor of fortune, and so is now half cracked, helurt. What the Hoffrid shall think of this when he sees it, readers may wonder. We, safe in the stronghold of historical fidelity, are careless. The main point, doubtless, for us all, is his love of Teufelsdröckh, which indeed was also by far the most decisive feature of Huyscreke himself. We are enabled to assert that he hung on the professor with the fondness of a Boswell for his Johnson, and perhaps with the like return, for Teufelsdröckh treated his gaunt admirer with little outward regard, as some half-rational or altogether irrational friend, and had best loved him out of gratitude and by habit. On the other hand, it was curious to observe with what reverent kindness and a sort of fatherly protection our Hoffart, being the elder, richer, and as he fondly imagined far more practically influential of the two, looked and tended on his little sage, whom he seemed to consider as a living oracle. Let but Teufelsdröckh open his mouth. Huyscreke also unpuckered itself into a free doorway, besides his being all eye and all ear, so that nothing might be lost. And then, at every pause in the harangue, he gurgled out his pursy chuckle of a cough laugh, for the machinery of laughter took some time to get in motion, and seemed crank and slack, or else his twanging nasal, bravo, das Glapikitsch, in either case by way of heartiest approval. In short, if Teufelsdröckh was Dalai Lama, of which, except perhaps in his self-seclusion and godlike indifference, there was no symptom, then might Huyscreke pass for his chief Talapoin, to whom no dough pill he could knead and publish was other than medicinal and sacred. In such environment, social, domestic, physical, did Teufelsdröckh, at the time of our acquaintance, and most likely does he still, live and meditate. Here, perched up in his high Wagos watchtower, and often, in solitude, out watching the bear, it was that the indomitable inquirer fought all his battles with dullness and darkness. Here, in all probability, that he wrote this surprising volume on clothes. Additional particulars of his age, which was of that standing middle sort you could only guess at, of his wide surtout, the color of his trousers, fashion of his broad-brimmed steeple hat, and so forth, we might report, but do not. The wisest truly is, in these times, the greatest, so that an enlightened curiosity, leaving kings and such like to rest very much on their own basis, turns more and more to the philosophic class. Nevertheless, what reader expects that, with all our writing and reporting, Teufelsdröckh could be brought home to him, till once the documents arrive? His life, fortunes, and bodily presence are as yet hidden from us, or matter only of faint conjecture. But, on the other hand, does not his soul lie enclosed in this remarkable volume, much more truly than Pedro Garcia's did in the buried bag of doubloons? To the soul of Diogenes Teufelsdröckh, to his opinions, namely, on the origin and influence of clothes, we for the present gladly return. Chapter 4. Charistics. It were a piece of vain flattery to pretend that this work on clothes entirely contents us, that it is not, like all works of genius, like the very sun, which, though the highest published creation, or work of genius, has nevertheless black spots and troubled nebulosities amid its effulgence, a mixture of insight, inspiration, with dullness, double vision, and even utter blindness. Without committing ourselves to those enthusiastic praises and prophesyings of the Weisnichtisches Anzeiger, we admitted that the book had in a high degree excited us to self-activity, which is the best effect of any book.
that it had even operated changes in our way of thought, nay, that it promised to prove, as it were, the opening of a new mine shaft, wherein the whole world of speculation might henceforth dig to unknown depths. More specially may it now be declared that Professor Teufelsdröck's acquirements, patience of research, philosophic and even poetic vigor are here made indisputably manifest, and unhappily no less his prolixity and tortuosity and manifold ineptitude, that on the whole as in opening new mine shafts is not unreasonable. There is much rubbish in his book, though likewise specimens of almost invaluable ore. A paramount popularity in England we cannot promise him. Apart from the choice of such a topic as clothes, too often the manner of treating it betokens in the author a rusticity and academic seclusion, unblameable, indeed inevitable in a German, but fatal to his success with our public. Of good society Teufelsdröckh appears to have seen little, or has mostly forgotten what he saw. He speaks out with a strange plainness, calls many things by their mere dictionary names. To him the upholsterer is no pontiff, neither is any drawing-room a temple, where it never shall be gilt and overhung. A whole immensity of Brussels carpets and pier glasses and ormolu, as he himself expresses it, cannot hide from me that such drawing-room is simply a section of infinite space, where so many God-created souls do for the time meet together. To Teufelsdröckh the highest duchess respectable is venerable, but now is for her pearl bracelets and Malines laces. In his eyes, the star of a lord is little less and little more than the broad button of Birmingham spelter in a clown smock. Each is an implement, he says, in its kind, a tag for hooking together, and for the rest was dug from the earth and hammered on a stithy before Smith's fingers. Thus does the professor look in men's faces with a strange impartiality, a strange scientific freedom, like a man unversed in the higher circles, like a man dropped thither from the moon. Rightly considered, it is in this peculiarity running through his whole system of thought that all these shortcomings, overshootings, and multiform perversities take rise, if indeed they have not a second source, also natural enough in his transcendental philosophies and humor of looking at all matter and material things as spirit, whereby truly his case were but the more hopeless, the more lamentable. To the thinkers of this nation, however, of which class it is firmly believed there are individuals yet extant, we can safely recommend the work, nay, who, knows but among the fashionable ranks, too, if it be true, as Teufelsdröckh maintains, that within the most starched cravat there passes a windpipe and weasand, and under the thickliest embroidered waistcoat beats a heart, the force of that rapt earnestness may be felt, and here and there an arrow of the soul pierced through. In our wild seer, shaggy, unkempt, like a Baptist living on locusts and wild honey, there is an untutored energy, a silent, as it were unconscious, strength, which, except in the higher walks of literature, must be rare. Many a deep glance, and often with unspeakable precision, has he cast into mysterious nature and the still more mysterious life of man. Wonderful it is, with what cutting words now and then he severs asunder the confusion, shears down, were it furlongs deep, into the true center of the matter, and there not only hits the nail on the head, but with crushing force smites it home and buries it. On the other hand, let us be free to admit he is the most unequal writer breathing. Often after some such feat he will play truant for long pages and go, dawdling and dreaming and mumbling and maundering the merest commonplaces, as if he were asleep with eyes open, which indeed he is. of his boundless learning, and how all reading and literature in most known tongues, from Sanchoniathon to Dr. Lingard, from your Oriental Shasters and Talmuds and Korans, with Cassini's Siamese fables and Laplace's Mécanique Céleste, down to Robinson Crusoe and the Belfast Town and Country Almanac, are familiar to him, we shall say nothing, for unexampled as it is with us. To the Germans such universality of study passes without wonder, as a thing commendable, but no verkeerd. A man that devotes his life to learning, shall he not be learned? In respect of style, our author manifests the same genial capability, marred too often by the same rudeness, inequality, and apparent want of intercourse with the higher classes. Occasionally, as above hinted, we find consummate vigor, a true inspiration. His burning thoughts step forth in fit burning words, like so many full-formed Minervas, issuing amid flame and splendor from Jove's head, a rich idiomatic diction, picturesque allusions, fiery poetic emphasis, or quaint tricksy turns, all the graces and terrors of a wild imagination, wedded to the clearest intellect, alternate in beautiful vicissitude. Were it not that sheer sleeping in soporific passages, circumlocutions, repetitions, touches even of pure doting jargon so often intervene. On the whole, Professor Teufelsdröckh is not a cultivated writer. Of his sentences, perhaps not more than 9/10 stand straight on their legs. The remainder are in quite angular attitudes, buttressed up by props of parentheses and dashes, and ever with this or the other tag-rag hanging from them. A few even sprawl out helplessly on all sides, quite broken-backed and dismembered. Nevertheless, in almost his very worst moods, there lies in him a singular attraction. A wild tone pervades the whole utterance of the man, like its keynote and regulator, now screwing itself aloft as into the song of spirits, or else the shrill mockery of fiends, now sinking in cadences, not without melodious heartiness, though sometimes abrupt enough, into the common pitch, when we hear it only as a monotonous hum, of which hum the true character is extremely difficult to fix. Up to this hour we have never fully satisfied ourselves whether it is a tone and hum of real humor, which we reckon among the very highest qualities of genius, or some echo of mere insanity and inanity, which doubtless ranks below the very lowest. Under a light difficulty, in spite even of our personal intercourse, do we still lie with regard to the professor's moral feeling. Gleams of an ethereal love burst forth from him, soft wailings of infinite pity. He could clasp the whole universe into his bosom and keep it warm. It seems as if under that rude exterior there dwelt a very seraph. Then again he is so sly and still, so imperturbably saturnine, shows such indifference, malign coolness towards all that men strive after, and ever with some half-visible wrinkle of a bitter sardonic humor, if indeed it be not mere stolid callousness, that you look on him almost with a shudder, as on some incarnate Mephistopheles, to whom this great terrestrial and celestial round, after all, were but some huge foolish whirligig, where kings and beggars and angels and demons and stars and street sweepings were chaotically whirled, in which only children could take interest. His look, as we mentioned, is probably the gravest ever seen, yet it is not of that cast-iron gravity frequent enough among our own chancery suitors, but rather the gravity as of some silent, high-encircled mountain pool, perhaps the crater of an extinct volcano, into whose black deeps you fear to gaze. Those eyes, those lights that sparkle in it, may indeed be reflexes of the heavenly stars, but perhaps also glances from the region of the fire. Certainly a most involved, self-secluded, altogether enigmatic nature, this of Teufelsdröckh. Here, however, we gladly recall to mind that once we saw him laugh once only, Perhaps it was the first and last time in his life. But then such a peal of laughter, enough to have awakened the seven sleepers. It was of Jean Paul's doing, some single billow in that vast world maelstrom of humor, with its heaven-kissing coruscations which is now, alas, all congealed in the frost of death. Picanet quotes adbicable. Tenstros of these ixophoresis, comi pain, atompical entre harwangs, and, as it chanced, on the proposal for a cast metal king, gradually a light kindled in our professor's eyes and face, a beaming, mantling, loveliest light through those murky features, a radiant ever-young Apollo looked, and he burst forth at light continual titers, to tel ter region down the present editor, who laughed indeed, yet with measure, began to fear all. Was not right, however. Teufelsdröckh composed himself and sank into his old stillness. On his inscrutable countenance there was, if anything, a slight look of shame, and Richter himself could not rouse him again. Readers who have any tincture of psychology know how much is to be inferred from this, and that no man who has once heartily and wholly laughed can be altogether irreclaimably bad. How much lies in laughter, the cipher key, wherewith we decipher the whole man. Some men wear an everlasting barren simper. In the smile of others lies a cold glitter as of ice. The fewest are able to laugh. What can be called laughing but only sniff and titter and snigger from the throat outwards, or at best produce some whiffling husky cachinnation, as if they were laughing through wool. Of none such comes good. The man who cannot laugh is not only fit for treasons, stratagems, and spoils, but his whole life is already a treason and a stratagem. Considered as an author, Herr Teufelsdröckh has one scarcely pardonable. Fault. Doubtless his worst and almost total want of arrangement. In this remarkable volume, it is true, his adherence to the mere course of time produces, through the narrative portions, a certain show of outward method. But of true logical method and sequence there is too little. Apart from its multifarious sections and subdivisions, the work naturally falls into two parts, a historical descriptive and a philosophical speculative, but falls, unhappily, by no firm line of demarcation. In that labyrinthic combination, each part overlaps and indents, and indeed runs quite through the other. Many sections are of a debatable rubric, or even quite nondescript and unnamable, whereby the book not only loses in accessibility, but too often distresses us like some mad banquet, wherein all courses had been confounded, and fish and flesh, soup and solid, oyster sauce, lettuces, Rhine wine, and French mustard were hurled into one huge tureen or trough, and the hungry public invited to help itself. To bring what order we can out of this chaos shall be part of our endeavor. Chapter 5. The World in Clothes. As Montesquieu wrote a spirit of laws, observes our professor, so could I write a spirit of clothes. Thus, with an esprit de l'oise, properly an esprit de couperums, we should have an esprit de couperums, we should have an esprit de costumes. For neither in tailoring nor in legislating does man proceed by mere accident, but the hand is ever guided on by mysterious operations of the mind. In all his modes and habilitary endeavors, an architectural idea will be found lurking. His body and the cloth are the site and materials whereon and whereby his beautified edifice of a person is to be built. Whether he flow gracefully out in folded mantles, based on light sandals, tower up in high headgear from amid peaks, spangles, and bell girdles, swell out in starched ruffs, buckram stuffings, and monstrous tuberosities, or girth himself into separate sections and front the world an agglomeration of four limbs, will depend on the nature of such architectural idea, whether Grecian, Gothic, later Gothic, or altogether modern and Parisian, or Anglo-Dandia? Again, what meaning lies in color? From the soberest drab to the high-flaming scarlet, spiritual idiosyncrasies unfold themselves in choice of color. If the cut betoken intellect and talent, so does the color betoken timber and heart. In all which, among nations as among individuals, there is an incessant, indubitable, though infinitely complex working of cause and effect. Every snip of the scissors has been regulated and prescribed by ever-active influences, which doubtless to intelligences of a superior order are neither invisible nor illegible. For such superior intelligences, a cause and effect philosophy of clothes, as of laws, were probably a comfortable winter evening entertainment. Nevertheless, for inferior intelligences, like men, such philosophies have always seemed to me uninstructive enough. Nay, what is your Montesquieu himself but a clever infant spelling letters from a hieroglyphical prophetic book, the lexicon of which lies in eternity, in heaven? Let any cause and effect philosopher explain, not why I wear such and such a garment, obey such and such a law, but even why I am here to wear and obey anything. Much, therefore, if not the whole of that same spirit of clothes, I shall suppress, as hypothetical, ineffectual, and even impertinent, naked facts and deductions, drawn therefrom in quite another than that omniscient style, are my humbler and proper province. Acting on which prudent restriction Teufelsdröckh has nevertheless contrived to take in a well-nigh boundless extent of field. At least, the boundaries too often lie quite beyond our horizon. Selection being indispensable, we shall here glance over his first part only in the most cursory manner. This first part is, no doubt, distinguished by omnivorous learning and utmost patience and fairness. At the same time, in its results and delineations, it is much more likely to interest the compilers of some library of general, entertaining, useful, or even useless knowledge than the miscellaneous readers of these pages. Was it this part of the book which Heidricke had in view when he recommended us to that joint stock vehicle of publication, at present the glory of British literature? If so, the library editors are welcome to dig in it for their own behoof. To the first chapter, which turns on paradise and fig leaves, and leads us into interminable disquisitions of a mythological, metaphorical, cabalistico-sartorial, and quite Anatolian cast, we shall content ourselves with giving an unconcerned approval. Still less have we to do with Lilith, Adam's first wife, whom, according to the Talmudists, he had before Eve, and who bore him, in that wedlock, the whole progeny of aerial, aquatic, and terrestrial devils, very needlessly, we think. On this portion of the work, with its profound glances into the Adam-Kadmon, or primeval element, here strangely brought into relation with the Niphal and Muspel darkness and light of the antique North, it may be enough to say that its correctness of deduction and depth of Talmudic and rabbinical lore have filled perhaps not the worst Hebrist in Britain with something like astonishment. But, quitting this twilight region, Teufelsdröckh hastens from the Tower of Babel to follow the dispersion of mankind over the whole habitable and habitable globe, walking by the light of Oriental, Pelasgic, Scandinavian, Egyptian, Odohatian, ancient and modern researches of every conceivable kind. He strives to give us, in compressed shape as the Nurnbergers give an orbis pictus and orbis vestitus, or view of the costumes of all mankind, in all countries, in all times. It is here that to the antiquarian, to the historian, we can triumphantly say, fall to. Here is learning, an irregular treasury if you will, but inexhaustible as the hoard of King Nibelung, which 12 wagons in 12 days, at the rate of 3 journeys a day, could not carry off. Sheepskin cloaks and wampum belts, phylacteries, stoles, albs, chlamydes, togas, Chinese silks, Afghan shawls, trunk hose, leather breeches, Celtic heelibags, though breeches, as the name Gallia bracata indicates, are the more ancient, hussar cloaks, Vandyke tippets, ruffs, fardingales, are brought vividly before us. Even the Kilmarnock nightcap is not forgotten. For most part, too, we must admit that the learning, heterogeneous as it is and tumbled down quite pell-mell, is true concentrated and purified learning. The drossy parts, smelted out and thrown aside, philosophical reflections intervene, and sometimes touching pictures of human life. Of this sort, the following has surprised us. The first purpose of clothes, as our professor imagines, was not warmth or decency, but ornament. Miserable indeed, says he, was the condition of the aboriginal savage, glaring fiercely from under his fleece of hair, which with the beard reached down to his loins and hung round him like a matted cloak, the rest of his body sheeted in its thick natural fell. He loitered in the sunny glades of the forest, living on wild fruits, or, as the ancient Caledonian, squatted himself in morasses, lurking for his bestial or human prey, without implements, without arms, save the ball of heavy flint, to which, that his sole possession and defense might not be lost, he had attached a long cord of plaited thongs, thereby recovering as well as hurling it with deadly, unerring skill. Nevertheless, the pains of hunger and revenge once satisfied, his next care was not comfort, but decoration putts. Warmth he found in the toils of the chase, or mid dried leaves in his hollow tree, in his bark shed, or natural grotto, but for decoration he must have clothes. Nay, among wild people, we find tattooing and painting even prior to clothes. The first spiritual want of a barbarous man is decoration, as indeed we still see among the barbarous classes in civilized countries. Reader, the heaven-inspired melodious singer, loftiest serene highness, nay thy own amber-locked snow and rose-bloom maiden, worthy to glide sylph-like almost on air, whom thou lovest, worshipest as a divine presence, which indeed, symbolically taken, she is, has descended, like thyself, from that same hair-mantled, flint-hurling Aperbacobus. Out of the eater cometh forth meat, out of the strong cometh forth sweetness. What changes are wrought, not by time, yet in time, for not mankind only, but all that mankind does or beholds, is in continual growth, regenesis and self-perfecting vitality. Cast forth thy act, thy word, into the ever-living, ever-working universe. It is a seed grain that cannot die. Unnoticed today, says one, it will be found flourishing as a banyan grove perhaps, alas, as a hemlock forest, after 1,000 years. He who first shortened the labor of copyists by device of movable types was disbanding hired armies, and cashiering most kings and senates, and creating a whole new democratic world. He had invented the art of printing. The first ground handful of nitre, sulfur, and charcoal drove Monk Schwartz's pestle through the ceiling. What will the last do? Achieve the final undisputed prostration of force under thought, of animal courage under spiritual. A simple invention it was in the old world. Grazier, sick of lugging his slow ox about the country till he got it, bartered for corn or oil to take a piece of leather, and thereon scratch or stamp the mere figure of an ox or picus, put it in his pocket, and call it pecunia, money. Yet hereby did barter grow selle. The leather money is now golden and paper, and all miracles have been out-miracled. For there are Rothschilds and English national debts, and whoso has sixpence is sovereign to the length of sixpence over all men, commands cooks to feed him, philosophers to teach him, kings to mount guard over him to the length of sixpence. Clothes, too, which began in foolishest love of ornament, what have they not become? Increased security and pleasurable heat soon followed, but what of these? Shame, divine shame, shame, modesty, as yet a stranger to the anthropophagus bosom, arose there mysteriously under clothes, a mystic grove encircled shrine for the holy in man. Clothes gave us individuality, distinctions, social polity. Clothes have made men of us. They are threatening to make clothes screens of us. But, on the whole, continues our eloquent professor, man is a tool using. Animal hand of Frentestiere. Weak in himself and of small stature, he stands on a basis, at most, for the flattest soled, of some half-square foot, insecurely enough, has to straddle out his legs, lest the very wind supplant him. Feeblest of bipeds. 3 quintals are a crushing load for him. The steer of the meadow tosses him aloft, like a waste rag. Nevertheless he can use tools, can devise tools. With these the granite mountain melts into light dust before him. He needs glowing iron, as if it were soft paste. Seas are his smooth highway, winds and fire his unwearying steeds. Nowhere do you find him without tools. Without tools he is nothing, with tools he is all. Here may we not, for a moment, interrupt the stream of oratory with a remark that this definition of the tool-using animal appears to us, of all that animal sort, considerably the precisest and best? Man is called a laughing animal, but do not the apes also laugh, or attempt to do it? And is the manliest man the greatest and oftenest laugher? Teufelsdröckh himself, as we said, laughed only once. Still less do we make of that other French definition of the cooking animal, which indeed, for rigorous scientific purposes, is as good as useless. Can a Tartar be said to cook when he only readies his steak by riding on it? Again, what cookery does the Greenlander use, beyond stowing up his whale blubber, as a marmot, in the like case, might do? Or how would Monsieur Ude prosper among those Orinoco Indians who, according to Humboldt, lodge in crow nests on the branches of trees, and, for half the year, have no victuals but pipe clay, the whole country being under water? But, on the other hand, show us the human being of any period or climate without his tools. Those very Caledonians, as we saw, had their flint ball and thong to it, such as no brute has or can have. Man is a tool-using animal, concludes Teufelsdröckh in his abrupt way, of which truth clothes are but one example. And surely if we consider the interval between the first wooden dibble fashioned by man and those Liverpool steam carriages or the British House of Commons, we shall note what progress he has made. He digs up certain black stones from the bosom of the earth and says to them, "Transport me and this luggage at the rate of 30 miles an hour," and they do it. He collects, apparently by lot, 658 miscellaneous individuals, and says to them, "Make this nation toil for us, bleed for us, hunger and sorrow and sin for us," and they do it. Chapter 6. Aprons. One of the most unsatisfactory sections in the whole volume is that on aprons. What though stout old Gao, the Persian blacksmith, whose apron, now indeed hidden under jewels, because raised in revolt which proves successful, is still the royal standard of that country? What though John Knox's daughter, who threatened sovereign majesty, that she would catch her husband's head in her apron, rather than he should lie and be a bishop? What though the Landgravine Elizabeth, with many other apron worthies, figure here? An idle wire drawing spirit, sometimes even a tone of levity, approaching to conventional satire, is too clearly discernible. What, for example, are we to make of such sentences as the following? Aprons are defenses against injury to cleanliness, to safety, to modesty, sometimes to roguery. From the thin slip of notched silk, as it were, the emblem and beatified ghost of an apron, which some highest-bred housewife, sitting at Nuremberg work-boxes and toy-boxes, has gracefully fastened on, to the thick, tanned hide, girt round him with thongs, wherein the builder builds, and at evening sticks his trowel. Or to those jingling sheet-iron aprons, wherein your otherwise half-naked Vulcans hammer and smelt in their smelt furnace, is there not range enough in the fashion and uses of this vestment? How much has been concealed, how much has been defended in aprons? Nay, rightly considered, what is your whole military and police establishment, charged at uncalculated millions, but a huge scarlet-colored iron-fastened apron, wherein society works uneasily enough, guarding itself from some soil and stithy sparks in this devil's smithy Teufels schmiedy of a world? But of all aprons the most puzzling to me hitherto has been the episcopal or cassock. Wherein consists the usefulness of this apron? The overseer episcopus of souls, I notice, has tucked in the corner of it as if his day's work were done. What does he shadow forth thereby? Anchte, anchte. Or again, has it often been the lot of our readers to read such stuff as we shall? Now quote, I consider those printed paper aprons worn by the Parisian cooks as a new vent, though a slight one, for typography. Therefore, as an encouragement to modern literature and deserving of approval, nor is it without satisfaction that I hear of a celebrated London firm having in view to introduce the same fashion, with important extensions, in England. We who are on the spot hear of no such thing, and indeed have reason to be thankful that hitherto there are other vents for our literature, exuberant as it is. Teufelsdröckh continues, if such supply of printed paper should rise so far as to choke up the highways and public thoroughfares, new means must of necessity be had recourse to. In a world existing by industry, we grudge to employ fire as a destroying element, and not as a creating one. However, heaven is omnipotent, and will find us an outlet. In the meanwhile, is it not beautiful to see 5,000,000 quintals of rags picked annually from the laystall, and annually, after being macerated, hot-pressed, printed on and sold, returned thither, filling so many hungry mouths by the way? Thus is the laystall, especially with its rags or clothes rubbish, the grand electric battery and fountain of motion from which and to which the social activities like vitreous and resinous electricity circulate in larger or smaller circles through the mighty billowy storm-tossed chaos of life, which they keep alive. Such passages fill us, who love the man and partly esteem him, with a very mixed feeling. Farther down we meet with this. The journalists are now the true kings and clergy. Henceforth historians, unless they are fools, must write not of Bourbon dynasties and Tudors and Habsburgs, but of stamped broad-sheet dynasties and quite new successive names, according as this or the other able editor or combination of able editors gains the world's ear. Of the British newspaper press, perhaps the most important of all, and wonderful enough in its secret constitution and procedure, a valuable descriptive history already exists in that language, under the title of Satan's Invisible World Displayed, which, however, by search in all the Weisnitzsche libraries, I have not yet succeeded in procuring vermochte date abzuschreiben. Thus does the good Homer not only nod, but snore. Thus does Teufelsdröckh, wandering in regions where he had little business, confound the old authentic Presbyterian witch-finder with a new, spurious, imaginary historian of the Britische journalist, and so stumble on perhaps the most egregious blunder in modern literature. Chapter 7, Miscellaneous Historical. Happier is our professor, and more purely scientific and historic, when he reaches the Middle Ages in Europe and down to the end of the 17th century, the true era of extravagance in costume. It is here that the antiquary and student of modes comes upon his richest harvest. Fantastic garbs, beggaring all fancy of a Teniers or a Calotte, succeed each other, like monster devouring monster in a dream. The whole too in brief authentic strokes, and touched not seldom with that breath of genius which makes even old raiment live. Indeed, so learned, precise, graphical, and every way interesting have we found these chapters, that it may be thrown out as a pertinent question for parties concerned, whether or not a good English translation thereof might henceforth be profitably incorporated with Mr. Merrick's valuable work on ancient armor. Take, by way of example, the following sketch as authority for which Paulinus's Zeitkurzende Lust ei. 678 is, with seeming confidence, referred to. Did we behold the German fashionable dress of the 15th century, we might smile, as perhaps those bygone Germans, were they to rise again and see our haberdashery, would cross themselves and invoke the Virgin. But happily no bygone German or man rises again. Thus the present is not needlessly trammeled with the past, and only grows out of it, like a tree, whose roots are not intertangled with its branches, but lie peaceably underground. Nay, it is very mournful, yet not useless, to see and know how the greatest and dearest, in a short while, would find his place quite filled up here, and no room for him. The very Napoleon, the very Byron, in some 7 years, has become obsolete, and were now a foreigner to his Europe. Thus is the law of progress secured, and in clothes, as in all other external things whatsoever, no fashion will continue. Of the military classes in those old times, whose buff belts, complicated chains and gorgets, huge churn boots, and other riding and fighting gear have been bepainted in modern romance, till the whole has acquired somewhat of a signpost character, I shall here say nothing, the civil and pacific classes, less touched upon, are wonderful enough for us. Rich men, I find, have tisinka, a perhaps untranslatable article, also a silver girdle, whereat hang little bells, so that when a man walks, it is with continual jingling. Some few, of musical turn, have a whole chime of bells, glockenspiel fastened there, which, especially in sudden whirls and the other accidents of walking, has a grateful effect. Observe, too, how fond they are of peaks and Gothic arch intersections. The male world wears peaked caps, an eel long, which hang bobbing over the side sheaf. Their shoes are peaked in front, also to the length of an eel, and laced on the side with tags. Even the wooden shoes have their eel-long noses, some also clap bells on the peak. Further, according to my authority, the men have breeches without seat en gazette. These they fasten peakwise to their shirts, and the long round doublet must overlap them. Rich maidens, again, flit abroad in gowns scolloped out behind and before, so that back and breast are almost bare. Wives of quality, on the other hand, had train gowns 4 or 5 ells in length, which trains there are boys to carry. Brave Cleopatras sailing in their silk cloth galley with a Cupid for steersman. Consider their welts, a handbreadth thick, which waver round them by way of hymn. The long flood of silver buttons, or rather silver shells, from throat to shoe, wherewith these same welt gowns are buttoned. The maidens have bound silver snoods about their hair, with gold spangles and pendant flames. Flamen, that is, sparkling hair-drops, but of their mother's headgear who shall speak? Neither in love of grace is comfort forgotten. In winter weather you behold the whole fair creation that can afford it in long mantles, with skirts wide below, and, for hem, not one but two sufficient hand broad welts, all ending atop in a thick, well-starched ruff, some 20 inches broad. These are their rough mantles, Kragen mantle. As yet among the womankind hoop petticoats are not, but the men have doublets of fustian, under which lie multiple ruffs of cloth, pasted together with batter meat tag zusammenkeit clistered, which create protuberance enough. Thus do the two sexes vie with each other in the art of decoration, and as usual, the stronger carries it. Our professor, whether he have humor himself or not, manifests a certain feeling of the ludicrous, a sly observance of it, which, could emotion of any kind be confidently predicated of so still a man, we might call a real love. None of those bell-girdles, bushel breeches, counted shoes, or other the like phenomena, of which the history of dress offers so many, escape him, more especially the mischances, or striking adventures incident to the wearers of such, are noticed with due fidelity. Sir Walter Raleigh's fine mantle, which he spread in the mud under Queen Elizabeth's feet, appears to provoke little enthusiasm in him. He merely asks whether at that period the maiden queen was red painted on nose and white painted on the cheeks, as her tire women, when from spleen and wrinkles she would no longer look in any glass, were wont to serve her? We can answer that Sir Walter knew well what he was doing, and had the maiden queen been stuffed parchment dyed in verdigris, would have done the same. Thus, too, treating of those enormous habiliments that were not only slashed and gallooned, but artificially swollen out on the broader parts of the body, by introduction of bran, our professor fails not to comment on that luckless courtier who, having seated himself on a chair with some projecting nail on it, and therefrom rising, to pay his devoir on the entrance of majesty, instantaneously emitted several pecks of dry wheat dust, and stood there diminished to a spindle, his galloons and slashes dangling sorrowful and flatty round him. Whereupon the professor publishes this reflection: by what strange chances do we live in history? Erostratus by a torch, Milo by a bullock, Henry Darnley, an unfledged booby and bustard by his limbs, most kings and queens by being born under such and such a bed tester, Boileau Despero according to Helvetius by the peck of a turkey, and this ill-starred individual by a rend in his breeches, for no memoirist of Kaiser Otto's court omits him. Vain was the prayer of the mysticals for a talent of forgetting, my friends. Yield cheerfully to destiny, and read since it is written. Has Teufelsdröckh to be put in mind that, nearly related to the impossible talent of forgetting, stands that talent of silence, which even traveling Englishmen manifest? The simplest costume, observes our professor, which I anywhere find alluded to in history, is that used as regimental by Bolivar's cavalry in the late Columbian Wars. A square blanket, 12 feet in diagonal, is provided. Some were wont to cut off the corners and make it circular. In the center a slit is effected, 18 inches long. Through this the mother naked trooper introduces his head and neck, and so rides shielded from all weather, and in battle from many strokes, for he rolls it about his left arm, and not only dressed, but harnessed and draperied. With which picture of a state of nature, affecting by its singularity, and old Roman contempt of the superfluous, we shall quit this part of our subject. Chapter 8. The World Out of Close. If in the descriptive historical portion of this volume, Teufelsdröckh, discussing merely the word and origin and successive improvement of clothes, has astonished many a reader, much more will he in the speculative philosophical portion, which treats of their working or influences. It is here that the present editor first feels the pressure of his task, for here properly the higher and new philosophy of clothes commences, all untried, almost inconceivable region or chaos, and venturing upon which, how difficult yet how unspeakably important is it to know what course of survey and conquest is the true one, where the footing is firm substance and will bear us, where it is hollow or mere cloud and may engulf us. Teufelsdröckh undertakes no less than to expound the moral, political, even religious influences of clothes. He undertakes to make manifest in its thousand-fold bearings this grand proposition that man's earthly interests are all hooked and buttoned together and held up by clothes. He says in so many words, society is founded upon cloth. And again, society sails through the infinitude on cloth as on a Faustus mantle, or rather like the sheet of clean and unclean beasts in the apostle's dream, and without such sheet or mantle would sink to endless depths, or mount to inane limbos, and in either case be no more. By what chains, or indeed infinitely complected tissues of meditation this grand theorem is here unfolded, and innumerable practical corollaries are drawn therefrom. It were perhaps a mad ambition to attempt exhibiting. Our professor's method is not, in any case, that of common school logic, where the truths all stand in a row, each holding by the skirts of the other, but at best that of practical reasons, proceeding by large intuition over whole systematic groups and kingdoms, whereby, we might say, a noble complexity, almost like that of nature, reigns in his philosophy, or spiritual picture of nature, a mighty maze, yet, as faith whispers, not without a plan. Nay, we complained above, that a certain ignoble complexity, what we must call mere confusion, was also discernible. Often, also, we have to exclaim, would to heaven those same biographical documents were come! For it seems as if the demonstration lay much in the author's individuality, as if it were not argument that had taught him, but experience. At present, it is only in local glimpses, and by significant fragments, picked often at wide enough intervals from the original volume and carefully collated, that we can hope to impart some outline or foreshadow of this doctrine. Readers of any intelligence are once more invited to favor us with their most concentrated attention. Let these, after intense consideration, and not till then, pronounce whether on the utmost verge of our actual horizon there is not a looming as of land, a promise of new fortunate islands, perhaps whole undiscovered Americas, for such as have canvas to sail thither. As exordium to the whole, stand here the following long citation. With men of a speculative turn, writes Teufelsdröckh, there come seasons, meditative, sweet, yet awful hours, when in wonder and fear you ask yourself, that unanswerable question, who am I? The thing that can say, I das Wesen, das sich ich nennt. The world, with its loud trafficking, retires into the distance, and, through the paper hangings, and stone walls, and thick-plied tissues of commerce and polity, and all the living and lifeless integuments of society and a body, wherewith your existence sits, surrounded, the sight reaches forth into the void, deep, and you are alone with the universe, and silently commune with it as one mysterious presence with another. Who am I? What is this me? A voice, a motion, an appearance, some embodied, visualized idea in the eternal mind? Cogito ergo sum. Alas, poor cogitator, this takes us but a little way. Sure enough I am, and lately was not, but whence? How? Whereto? The answer lies around, written in all colors and motions, uttered in all tones of jubilee and wail, in thousand-figured, thousand-voiced, harmonious nature. But where is the cunning eye and ear to whom that God-written apocalypse will yield articulate meaning? We sit as in a boundless phantasmagoria and dream grotto. Boundless for the faintest star, the remotest century lies not even nearer the verge thereof. Sounds and many-colored visions flit round our sense, but him, the unslumbering, whose work both dream and dreamer are, we see not, except in rare half-waking moments, suspect not. Creation, says one, lies before us, like a glorious rainbow, but the Son of Man is thin, and that strange dream, how we clutch at shadows as if they were substances, and sleep deepest while fancying ourselves most awake. Which of your philosophical systems is other than a dream theorem? A net quotient, confidently given out, where divisor and dividend are both unknown. What are all your national wars, with their Moscow retreats and sanguinary hate-filled revolutions, but the somnambulism of uneasy sleepers? This dreaming, this somnambulism is what we on earth call life, wherein the most indeed undoubtedly wander, as if they knew right hand from left, yet they only are wise who know that they know nothing. Pity that all metaphysics had hitherto proved so inexpressibly unproductive. The secret of man's being is still like the Sphinx's secret, a riddle that he cannot read, and for ignorance of which he suffers death, the worst death, a spiritual. What are your axioms and categories and systems and aphorisms? Words, words. High air castles are cunningly built of words, the words well bedded also in good logic mortar, wherein, however, no knowledge will come to lodge. The whole is greater than the part, how exceedingly true. Nature abhors a vacuum, how exceedingly false and calumnious. Again, nothing can act but where it is, with all my heart. Only, where is it? Be not the slave of words. Is not the distant, the dead, while I love it, and long for it, and mourn for it? Here, in the genuine sense, as truly as the floor I stand on? But that same where, with its brother when, are from the first master colors of our dream grotto. Say rather, the canvas, the warp and woof thereof, whereon all our dreams and life visions are painted. Nevertheless, has not a deeper meditation. Taught certain of every climate and age, that the where and when, so mysteriously inseparable from all our thoughts, are but superficial terrestrial adhesions to thought, that the seer may discern them where they mount up out of the celestial, everywhere and forever. Have not all nations conceived their God as omnipresent and eternal, as existing in a universal, here, and everlasting now? Think well, thou too wilt find that space is but a mode of our human sense. So likewise time. There is no space and no time. Are we know not what, light sparkles floating in the ether of deity. So that this so solid-seeming world, after all, were but an air image, our me the only reality. And nature, with its thousand-fold production and destruction, but the reflex of our own inward force, the fantasy of our dream, or what the earth spirit in Faust names it, the living visible garment of God, in being's floods, in action storm. I walk and work, above, beneath. Work. And weave in endless motion, birth and death, an infinite ocean, a seizing and giving, the fire of living. 'Tis thus at the roaring loom of time I ply, and weave for God the garment thou seest him by. Of 20 millions that have read and spouted this thunder speech of the Ergeist, are there yet 20 units of us that have learned the meaning thereof? It was in some such mood, when wearied and fordone with these high speculations, that I first came upon the question of clothes. Strange enough, it strikes me, is this same fact of their being tailors and tailored. The horse I ride has his own whole fell. Strip him of the girts and flaps and extraneous tags I have fastened round him, and the noble creature is his own sempster and weaver and spinner, nay, his own bootmaker, jewelry and man-milliner. He bounds free through the valleys, with a perennial rain-proof court suit on his body, wherein warmth and easiness of fit have reached perfection. Nay, the graces also have been considered, and frills and fringes, with gay variety of color, featly appended, and ever in the right place, are not wanting. While I, good heaven, have thatched myself over with the dead fleeces of sheep, the bark of vegetables, the entrails of worms, the hides of oxen or seals, the felt of furred beasts, and walk abroad a moving rack screen, overheaped with shreds and tatters raked from the charnel house of nature, where they would have rotted, to rot on me more slowly. Day after day I must thatch myself anew. Day after day this despicable thatch must lose some film of its thickness, some film of it, frayed away by tear and wear, must be brushed off into the ash-pit, into the lay-stall, till by degrees the whole has been brushed thither, and I, the dust-making, patent rag-grinder, get new material to grind down. O subter brutish, vile, most vile! For have not I too a compact, all-enclosing skin, whiter or dingier? Am I a botched mass of tailor's and cobbler's shreds then? Or a tightly articulated, homogeneous little figure? Automatic, nay, alive? Strange enough how creatures of the human kind shut their eyes to plainest facts, and by the mere inertia of oblivion and stupidity live at ease in the midst of wonders and terrors. But indeed man is, and was always, a blockhead and dullard, much readier to feel and digest than to think and consider. Prejudice, which he pretends to hate, is his absolute lawgiver. Mere use and wont everywhere leads him by the nose. Thus let but a rising of the sun, let but a creation of the world happen twice, and it ceases to be marvelous, to be noteworthy or noticeable. Perhaps not once in a lifetime does it occur to your ordinary biped of any country or generation, be he gold-mantled prince or russet jerkined peasant, that his vestments and his self are not one and indivisible, that he is naked, without vestments, till he buy or steal such, and by forethought sew and button them. For my own part, these considerations of our clothes thatch, and how, reaching inwards even to our heart of hearts, at Misthelf, dismal feels at those Dutch cows which, during the wet season, you see grazing deliberately with jackets and petticoats of striped sacking in the meadows of Gouda. Nevertheless, there is something great in the moment when a man first strips himself of adventitious wrappages, and sees indeed, and as zate, and Juang litivs. Chapter 9. Adamantism. Let no courteous reader take offense at the opinions broached in the conclusion of the last chapter. The editor himself, on first glancing over that singular passage, was inclined to exclaim, "What, have we got not only a sansculottist, but an enemy to clothes in the abstract?" A new Adamite, in this century, which flatters itself that it is the 19th, and destructive both to superstition and enthusiasm. Consider, thou foolish Teufelsdröckh, what benefits unspeakable all ages and sexes derive from clothes. For example, when thou thyself, a watery, pulpy, slobbery freshman and newcomer in this planet, sattest mooling and puking in thy nurse's arms, sucking thy coral and looking forth into the world in the blankest manner, what hadst thou been without thy blankest, and bibs, and other nameless hulls? A terror to thyself and mankind. Or hast thou forgotten the day when thou first receivedst breeches, and thy long clothes became short? The village where thou livedst was all apprised of the fact, and neighbor after Neighbor kissed thy pudding cheek, and gave thee, as Hansel, silver or copper coins, on that the first gala day of thy existence. Again, wert not thou, at one period of life, a buck, or blood, or macaroni, or incroyable, or dandy, or by whatever name, according to year and place, such phenomenon is distinguished? In that one word lie included mysterious volumes. Nay, now when the reign of folly is over or altered, and thy clothes are not for triumph but for defense, hast thou always worn them perforce, and as a consequence of man's fall, never rejoiced in them as in a warm movable house, a body round thy body, wherein that strange they of thin sat snug, defying all variations of climate? Girt with thick double-milled kerseys, half buried under shawls and broad brims, and overalls and mud boots, thy very fingers cased in duskin and mittens, thou hast bestrode that horse I ride, and though it were in wild winter, dashed through the world, glorying in it as if thou wert its lord. In vain did the sleet beat round thy temples, it lighted only on thy impenetrable, felted or woven case of wool. In vain did the winds howl, forests sounding and creaking, deep calling unto deep, and the storms heaped themselves together into one huge arctic whirlpool. The flea was through the middle thereof, striking fire from the highway. Wild music hummed in thy ears. Thou too wert as a sailor of the air. The wreck of matter and the crash of worlds was thy element, and propitiously wafting tide. Without blows, without bit or saddle, and what had fleet quaffed it been? Nature is good, but she is not the best. Here truly was the victory of art over nature. A thunderbolt indeed might have pierced thee. All short of this thou couldst defy. Or, cries the courteous reader, has your Teufelsdröckh forgotten what he said lately about aboriginal savages, and their condition miserable indeed? Would he have all this unsaid, and us betake ourselves again to the matted cloak, and go sheeted in a thick natural fell? No, was courteous reader. The professor knows full well what he is saying, and both thou and we, in our haste, do him wrong. If clothes, in these times, so tailorize and demoralize us, have they no redeeming value? Can they not be altered to serve better? Must they of necessity be thrown to the dogs? The truth is, Teufelsdröckh, though a sansculottist, is no Adamite, and much perhaps as he might wish to go forth before this degenerate age, as a sign, would Noise wish to do it, as those old Adamites did, in a state of nakedness. The utility of clothes is altogether apparent to him. Nay, perhaps he has an insight into their more recondite and almost mystic qualities, what we might call the omnipotent virtue of clothes, such as was never before vouchsafed to any man. For example, you see two individuals, he writes, one dressed in fine red, the other in coarse threadbare blue. Red says to blue, "Be hanged and anatomized." Blue hears with a shudder, and O wonder of wonders, marches sorrowfully to the gallows. Is there new stuff vibrates his hour, and the surgeons dissect him and fit his. Bones into a skeleton for medical purposes. How is this, or what make ye of your? Nothing can act but where it is. Red has no physical hold of blue, no clutch of him, is nowise in contact with him. Neither are those ministering sheriffs and lord lieutenants and hangmen and tipstaves so related to commanding Red that he can tug them hither and thither, but each stands distinct within his own skin. Nevertheless, as it is spoken, so is it done. The articulated word sets all hands in action, and rope and improved drop perform their work. Thinking, reader, the reason seems to me twofold. First, that man is a spirit and bound by invisible bonds to all men. Secondly, that he wears clothes, which are the visible emblems of that fact. Has not your red hanging individual a horsehair wig, squirrel skins, and a plush gown? whereby all mortals know that he is a judge? Society, which the more I think of it astonishes me the more, is founded upon cloth. Often in my atrabiliar moods, when I read of pompous ceremonials, Frankfurt coronations, royal drawing rooms, levees, couches, and how the ushers and makers and pursuivants are all in waiting, how Duke this is presented by Archduke that, and Colonel A by General B, and innumerable bishops, admirals, and miscellaneous functionaries are advancing gallantly to the anointed presence, and I strive, in my remote privacy, to form a clear picture of that solemnity, also king. The clothes fly off the whole dramatic corps, and dukes, grandees, bishops, generals, anointed presence itself, every mother's son of them, stands straddling there, not a shirt on them, and I know not whether to laugh or weep. This physical or psychical infirmity, in which perhaps I am not singular, I have, after hesitation, thought right to publish, for the solace of those afflicted with the like. Would to heaven, say we, thou hadst thought right to keep it secret. Who is? There now, that can read the 5 columns of presentations in his morning newspaper without a shudder. Hypochondriac men, and all men are to a certain extent hypochondriac, should be more gently treated. With what readiness our fancy, in this shattered state of the nerves, follows out the consequences which Teufelsdröckh, with a devilish coolness, goes on to draw, what would Majesty do? Could such an accident befall in reality? Should the buttons all simultaneously start, and the solid wool evaporate, in very deed, as here in dream? Act God. How each skulks into the nearest hiding place, their high state tragedy helped, untasked action becomes a pickle herring farce to weep at, which is the worst kind of farce. The tables according to Horace, and with them the whole fabric of government, legislation, property, police, and civilized society, are dissolved, and wails and howls. Lives the man that can figure a naked Duke of Windlestraw addressing a naked House of Lords? Imagination, choked as in mephitic air, recoils on itself and will not forward with the picture. The woolsack, the ministerial, the opposition benches infrandum, and yet why is the thing impossible? Was not every soul, or rather every body, of these guardians of our liberties naked or nearly so last night? A forked radish with a head fantastically carved? And why might he not, did our stern fate so order it, walk out to St. Stephen's as well as into bed in that no fashion, and there, with other similar radishes, hold a bed of justice? Solace of those afflicted with the like, unhappy Teufelsdröckh, had men ever such a physical or psychical infirmity before? And now how many, perhaps, may thy unparalleled confession, which we, even to the sounder British world, and goaded on by critical and biographical duty, grudge to reimpart incurably infect therewith? Art thou the malignest of sansculottists, or only the maddest? It will remain to be examined, adds the inexorable Teufelsdröckh, in how far the scarrow, as a closed person, is not also entitled to benefit of clergy and English trial by jury, nay, perhaps, considering his high function, for is not he, too, a defender of property, and sovereign armed with the terrors of the law? To a certain royal immunity and inviolability, which, however, misers in the meaner class of persons are not always voluntarily disposed to grant him. Oh, my friends, we are, in Yorick Stern's words, but as turkeys driven, with a stick in red clout, to the market, or if some drivers, as they do in Norfolk, take a dried bladder and put peas in it, the rattle thereof terrifies the boldest. Chapter 10. Purish Reason. it must now be apparent enough that our professor, as above hinted, is a speculative radical and of the very darkest tinge, acknowledging for most part in the solemnities and paraphernalia of civilized life, which we make so much of, nothing but so many cloth rags, turkey poles, and bladders with dried peas. To linger among such speculations longer than mere science requires, a discerning public can have no wish. For our purposes, the simple fact that such a naked world is possible, nay, actually exists under the clothed one, will be sufficient. Much, therefore, we omit about kings wrestling naked on the green with carmine, and the kings being thrown, dissect them with scalpels, says Teufelsdröckh. The same viscera, tissues, livers, lights, and other life tackle are there, examine their spiritual mechanism, the same great need, great greed, and little faculty, nay 10 to 1, but the carman, who understands draft cattle, the rimming of wheels, something of the laws of unstable and stable equilibrium, with other branches of wax aclipundax, as ayat kafli badabak. Operated on nature is the more cunningly gifted of the two. Whence then their so unspeakable difference from clothes? Much also we shall omit about confusion of ranks, and Joan and my lady, and how it would be everywhere. Hail fellow well met, and chaos were come again, all which to anyone that has once fairly pictured out the grand mother idea, society in a state of nakedness, will spontaneously suggest itself. Should some skeptical individuals still entertain doubts whether in a world without clothes the smallest politeness, polity, or even police could exist, let him turn to the original volume and view there the boundless Serbonian bog of Sansculotism, stretching sour and pestilential, over which we have lightly flown, where not only whole armies but whole nations might sink. If indeed the following argument, and its brief riveting emphasis, be not of itself incontrovertible and final, are we opossums, have we natural pouches like the kangaroo, or how, without clothes, could we possess the master organ, soul seat, and true pineal gland of the body social, a purse? Nevertheless, it is impossible to hate Professor Teufelsdröckh. At worst, one knows not whether to hate or to love him. For though, in looking at the fair tapestry of human life with its royal and even sacred figures, he dwells not on the obverse alone, but here chiefly on the reverse, and indeed turns out the rough seams, tatters, and manifold thrums of that unsightly wrong side, with an almost diabolic patience and indifference, which must have sunk him in the estimation of most readers, there is that within which unspeakably distinguishes him from all other past and present Sansculottists. The grand unparalleled peculiarity of Teufelsdröckh is that with all this descendentalism he combines a transcendentalism no less superlative, whereby if on the one hand he degrade man below most animals, except those jacketed Gouda cows, he, on the other, exalts him beyond the visible heavens, almost to an equality with the gods. To the eye of vulgar logic, says he, what is man, an omnivorous biped that wears breeches? To the eye of pure reason, what is he? A soul, a spirit, and divine apparition. Round his mysterious M.E. there lies, under all those wool rags, a garment of flesh or of senses, contextured in the loom of heaven, whereby he is revealed to his like, and dwells with them in union and division, and sees and fashions for himself a universe with azure starry space and long thousands of years, with azure starry space and long thousands of years. Deep hidden is he under that strange garment, amidst sounds and colors and forms, as it were, swathed in and inextricably overshrouded, yet it is sky-woven and worthy of a god. Stands he not thereby in the center of immensities in the conflux of eternities? He feels. Power has been given him to know, to believe. Nay, does not the spirit of love free in its celestial primeval brightness, even here, though but for moments, look through? Well, said St. Chrysostom, with his lips of gold, the true Shekinah is man, Where else is the God's presence manifested not to our eyes only, but to our hearts, as in our fellow man? In such passages, unhappily too rare, the high Platonic mysticism of our author, which is perhaps the fundamental element of his nature, bursts forth as it were in full flood, and through all the vapor and tarnish of what is often so perverse, so mean in his exterior and environment, we seem to look into a whole inward sea of light and love. Though, alas, the grim coppery clouds soon roll together again and hide it from view. Such tendency to mysticism is everywhere traceable in this man, and indeed, to attentive readers, must have been long ago apparent. Nothing that he sees but has more than a common meaning, but has two meanings. Thus, if in the highest imperial scepter and Charlemagne mantle, as well as in the poorest oxgoad and gypsy blanket, he finds prose, decay, contemptibility, there is in each sort poetry also, and a reverend worth. For matter, were it never so despicable, is spirit, the manifestation of spirit, were it never so honorable, can it be more? The thing visible, nay, the thing imagined, the thing in any way conceived, as visible, what is it but a garment, a clothing of the higher, celestial, invisible, unimaginable, formless, dark with excess of bright? Under which point of view the following passage, so strange in purport, so strange in phrase, seems characteristic enough. The beginning of all wisdom is to look fixedly on clothes, or even with armed eyesight, till they become transparent. The philosopher, says the wisest of this age, must station himself in the middle. How true! The philosopher is he to whom the highest has descended and the lowest has mounted up. Who is the equal and kindly brother of all? Shall we tremble before clothwebs and cobwebs, whether woven in arkwright looms, or by the silent arachnes that weave unrestingly in our imagination? Or, on the other hand, what is there that we cannot love, since all was created by God? Happy he who can look through the clothes of a man, the woolen and fleshly and official bank paper and state paper, clothes into the man himself, and discern it may be in this or the other dread potentate, a more or less incompetent digestive apparatus, yet also an inscrutable venerable mystery, in the meanest tinker that sees with eyes. For the rest, as is natural to a man of this kind, he deals much in the feeling of wonder, insists on the necessity and high worth of universal wonder, which he holds to be the only reasonable temper for the denizen of so singular a planet as ours. Wonder, says he, is the basis of worship. The reign of wonder is perennial, indestructible in man. Only at certain stages, as the present it is, for some short season, a reign in partibus infidelium, that progress of science, which is to destroy wonder, and in its stead substitute mensuration and numeration, finds small favor with Teufelsdröckh, much as he otherwise venerates these two latter processes. Shall your science, exclaims he, proceed in the small, chink-lighted, or even oil-lighted underground workshop of logic alone, and man's mind become an arithmetical mill, whereof memory is the hopper, and mere tables of sines and tangents, codification, and treatises of what you call political economy are the meal? And what is that? Science, which the scientific head alone, were it screwed off, and like the doctors in the Arabian tale set in a basin to keep it alive, could prosecute without shadow of a heart, but one other of the mechanical and menial handicrafts for which the scientific head, having a soul in it, is too noble an organ? I mean that thought without reverence is barren, perhaps poisonous, at best dies like cookery with the day that called it forth, does not live, like sowing, in successive tilths and wider spreading harvest, bringing food. and plenteous increase to all time. In such wise does Teufelsdröckh deal hits, harder or softer, according to ability. Yet ever as we would fain persuade ourselves with charitable intent. Above all, that class of logic choppers and treble-pipe scoffers and professed enemies to wonder, who in these days so numerously patrol as night constables about the Mechanics' Institute of Science, and cackle, like true old Roman geese and goslings round their capital, on any alarm or on none, nay, who often, as illuminated sceptics, walk abroad into peaceable society, in full daylight, with rattle and lantern, and insist on guiding you and guarding you where, though the Sutums hear with what uncommon animation he parades, the man who cannot wonder, who does not habitually wonder and worship. Were he president of innumerable royal societies, and carried the whole Mécanique Céleste and Hegel's philosophy, and the epitome of all laboratories and observatories with their results in his single head is but a pair of spectacles behind which there is no eye. Let those who have eyes look through him, then he may be useful. Thou wilt have no mystery and mysticism. Wilt walk through thy world by the sunshine of what thou callest truth, or even by the hand lamp of what I call attorney logic, and explain all, account for all, or believe nothing of it. Nay, thou wilt attempt laughter, whoso recognizes the unfathomable, all-pervading domain of mystery, which is everywhere under our feet and among our hands, to whom the universe is an oracle and temple, as well as a kitchen and cattle stall, he shall be a delirious mystic. To him thou, with sniffing charity, wilt protrusively proffer thy hand-lamp, and shriek, as one injured when he kicks his foot through it, Armer Teufel, doth not thy cow calve, doth not thy bull? Gender, thou thyself wert thou not born, wilt thou not die? Explain me all this, or do one of two things: retire into private places with thy foolish cackle, or, what were better, give it up, and weep, not that the reign of wonder is done, and God's world all disembellished and prosaic, but that thou hitherto art a dilettante and sand-blind pedant. Chapter 11. Prospective. The philosophy of clothes is now to all readers, as we predicted it would do, unfolding itself into new boundless expansions, of a cloud-capped, almost chimerical aspect, yet not without azure loomings in the far distance, and streaks as of an Elysian brightness, the highly questionable purport and promise of which it is becoming more and more important for us to ascertain. Is that a real Elysian brightness, cries many a timid wayfarer, or the reflex of pandemonian lava? Is it of a truth leading us into beatific asphodel meadows, or the yellow burning marl of a hell on earth? Our professor, like other mystics, whether delirious or inspired, gives an editor enough to do. Ever higher and dizzier are the heights he leads us to, more piercing, all-comprehending, all-confounding are his views and glances. For example, this of nature being not an aggregate but a whole. Well sang the Hebrew psalmist, "If I take the wings of the morning and dwell." In the uttermost parts of the universe, God is there. Thou thyself, O cultivated reader, who too probably art no psalmist, but a prosaist, knowing God only by tradition, knowest thou any corner of the world where at least for't is not? The drop which thou shakest from thy wet hand rests not where it falls, but tomorrow thou findest it swept away. Already on the wings of the north wind, it is nearing the Tropic of Cancer. How came it to evaporate and not lie motionless? Thinkest thou there is aught motionless, without force, and utterly dead? As I rode through the Schwarzwald, I said to myself, that little fire which glows star-like across the dark rowing Natende moor, where the sooty smith bends over his anvil, and thou hopest to replace thy lost horseshoe, is it a detached, separated speck, cut off from the whole universe? or indissolubly joined to the whole. Thou fool, that smithy fire was primarily kindled at the sun, is fed by air that circulates from before Noah's deluge, from beyond the dog star, therein, with iron force and coal force and the far stranger force of man are cunning affinities and battles and victories of force brought about. It is a little ganglion or nervous center in the great vital system of immensity. Call it, if thou wilt, an unconscious altar kindled on the bosom of the All, whose iron sacrifice, whose iron smoke and influence reach quite through the All, whose dingy priest, not by word, yet by brain and sinew, preaches forth the mystery of force, nay, preaches forth the mystery of force, nay, preaches forth exoterically enough one little textlet from the gospel of freedom, the gospel of man's force, commanding and one day to be all commanding, detached, separated. I say there is no such separation. Nothing hitherto was ever stranded, cast aside, but all were it only a withered leaf, works together with all, is borne forward on the bottomless, shoreless flood of action and lives through perpetual metamorphoses. The withered leaf is not dead and lost. There are forces in it and around it, though working in inverse order. Else how could it rot? The specie, not the rad from which man makes paper, or the litter from which the earth makes corn. Rightly viewed, no meanest object is insignificant. All objects are as windows, through which the philosophic eye looks into infinitude itself. Again, leaving that wondrous Schwarzwald smithy altar, what vacant high-sailing airships are these, and whither will they sail with us? All visible things are emblems. What thou seest is not there on its own account. Strictly taken, is not there at all. Matter exists only spiritually, and to represent some idea, and body it forth. Hence clothes, as despicable as we think them, are so unspeakably significant. Clothes, from the king's mantle downwards, are emblematic, not of want only, but of a manifold cunning, victory over want. On the other hand, all emblematic things are properly clothes, thought-woven or hand-woven. Must not the imagination weave garments, visible bodies, wherein the else invisible creations and inspirations of our reason are, like spirits, revealed, and first become all-powerful, the rather if, as we often see, the hand too aid her, and by wool, clothes or otherwise reveal such even to the outward eye. Men are properly said to be clothed with authority, clothed with beauty, with curses and the like. Nay, if you consider it, what is man himself, and his whole terrestrial life, but an emblem? A clothing or visible garment for that divine me of his, cast hither like a light particle down from heaven. Thus is he said also to be clothed with a body. Language is called the garment of thought. However, it should rather be, language is the flesh garment, the body of thought. I said that imagination wove this flesh garment, and does not she? Metaphors are her stuff. Examine language. What if you accept some few primitive elements of natural sound? What is it all but metaphors recognized as such, or no longer recognized, still? Fluid and florid are now solid, grown, and colorless? If those same primitive elements are the osseous fixtures in the flesh garment, language, then are metaphors its muscles and tissues and living integuments. An unmetaphorical style you shall in vain seek for. Is not your very attention a stretching too? The difference lies here. Some styles are lean, adduced, wiry. The muscle itself seems osseous. Some are even quite pallid, hunger-bitten and dead-looking, while others again glow in the flush of health and vigorous self-growth, sometimes, as in my own case, not without an apoplectic tendency. Moreover, there are sham metaphors, which overhanging that same thought's body best naked, and deceptively bedizening or bolstering it out, may be called its false stuffings, superfluous show cloaks. putsmantle, and tawdry woolen rags, whereof he that runs in reeds may gather whole hampers and burn them. In which paragraph on metaphors did the reader ever chance to see a more surprisingly metaphorical? However, that is not our chief grievance. The events. Professor continues, why multiply instances? It is written, the heavens and the earth shall fade away like a vesture, which indeed they are, the time vesture of the eternal. Whatsoever sensibly exists, whatsoever presents spirit to spirit, is properly a clothing, a suit of raiment, put on for a season, and to be laid off. Thus, in this one pregnant subject of clothes, rightly understood, is included all that men have thought, dreamed, done, and been. The whole external universe and what it holds is but clothing, and the essence of all science lies in the philosophy of clothes. Towards these dim, infinitely expanded regions, close bordering on the impalpable inane, it is not without apprehension and perpetual difficulties that the editor sees himself journeying and struggling. Till lately a cheerful day-star of hope hung before him in the expected aid of Retailored, which, Daystar, however, melts now, not into the red of morning, but into a vague gray half-light, uncertain whether dawn of day or dusk of utter darkness. For the last week, these so-called biographical documents are in his hand. By the kindness of a Scottish Hamburg merchant, whose name, known to the whole mercantile world, he must not mention, but whose honorable courtesy now and often before spontaneously manifested to him, a mere literary stranger, he cannot soon forget the bulky Weisnich II packet with all its custom-house seals, foreign hieroglyphs, and miscellaneous tokens of travel, arrived here in perfect safety and free of cost. The reader shall now fancy with what hot haste it was broken up, with what breathless expectation glanced over, and, alas, with what unquiet disappointment it has, since then, been often thrown down and again taken up. Hofrath in a too long-winded letter full of compliments, Weisnich politics, dinners, dining repartees, and other ephemeral trivialities, proceeds to remind us of what we knew well already, that however it may be, with metaphysics and other abstract science originating in the head for stand alone, no life philosophy, such as this of clothes pretends to be, which originates equally in the character, Gemoth, and equally speaks thereto, can attain its significance till the character itself is known and seen, till the author's view of the world weltansicht, and how he actively and passively came by such view of nigh, adds reactively and persuasivo koai, adds kai aid quar kidilon code bad, and rests not till, if no better may be, fancy have shaped out an answer, and either in the authentic lineaments of fact, or the forged ones of fiction, a complete picture and genetical history of the man and his spiritual endeavor lies before you. But why, says the Hofrath, and indeed say we, do I dilate on the uses of our Teufelsdröck's biography, the great Herr Minister von Gode has? Penetratingly remarked that man is properly the only object that interests man. Thus I too have noted that in Weisnich our whole conversation is little or nothing else but biography or autobiography, ever humano-anecdotical, menschlich anecdotic. Biography is by nature the most universally profitable, universally pleasant of all things, especially biography of distinguished individuals. By this time, mein verehrtester, my most esteemed, continues he, with an eloquence which, unless the words be purloined from Teufelsdröckh, or some trick of his, as we suspect, is well nigh unaccountable, by this time you are fairly plunged, vertiefed in that mighty forest of clothes philosophy, and looking round, as all readers do, with astonishment enough. such portions and passages as you have already mastered and brought to paper could not but awaken a strange curiosity touching the mind they issued from, the perhaps unparalleled psychical mechanism which manufactured such matter and emitted it to the light of day. Had Teufelsdröckh also a father and mother? Did he at one time wear drivel bibs and live on spoon meat? Did he ever, in rapture and tears, clasp a friend's bosom to his? Looks he also wistfully into the long burial isle of the past, where only winds and their low harsh moan give inarticulate answer? Has he fought duels? Good heaven, how did he comport himself when in love? By what singular stair-steps in short and subterranean passages and slows of despair and steep Pisica hills has he reached this wonderful prophetic Hebron, a true old closed jury where he now dwells? To all these natural questions the voice of public history is as yet silent, certain only that he has been and is a pilgrim and traveler from a far country, more or less footsore and travel-soiled, has parted with road companions, fallen among thieves, been poisoned by bad cookery, blistered with bug bites. Nevertheless, at every stage where they have let him pass, has had the bill to discharge. But the whole particulars of his route, his weather observations, the picturesque sketches he took, though all regularly jotted down in indelible sympathetic ink by an invisible interior penman, are these nowhere forthcoming? Perhaps quite lost, one other leaf of that mighty volume of human memory, left to fly abroad, unprinted, unpublished, unbound up, as waste paper, and to rot, the sport of rainy winds? No wertester Herr, Herausschöpfer, in no wise. I here, by the unexampled favor you stand in with our sage, send not a biography only, but an autobiography, at least the materials for such, wherefrom, if I misreckon not, your perspicacity will draw fullest insight, and so the whole philosophy and philosopher of clothes will stand clear to the wondering eyes of England. Nay, thence, through America, to Hindustan and the antipodal New Holland, finally conquer in great part of this terrestrial planet. And now let the sympathizing reader judge of our feeling when, in place of this, same autobiography with fullest insight, we find 6 considerable paper bags carefully sealed and marked successively in gilt china ink with the symbols of the 6 southern zodiacal signs, beginning at Libra, in the inside of which sealed bags lie miscellaneous masses of sheets and oftener shreds and snips, written in Professor Teufelsdröck's scarce legible cursive schrift, and treating of all imaginable timing, and above it, but of his own history only at and above it, but of his ensign in the most fanenert. Whole fascicles there are, wherein the professor, or, as he here, speaking in the third person, calls himself the wanderer, is not once named. Then again, amidst what seems to be a metaphysical theological disquisition, detached thoughts on the steam engine or the continued possibility of prophecy, we shall meet with some quite private, not unimportant biographical fact. On certain sheets stand dreams, authentic or not, while the circumjacent waking actions are omitted. Anecdotes oftenest without date of place or time, fly loosely on separate slips like Sibylline leaves. Interspersed also are long, purely autobiographical delineations, yet without connection, without recognizable coherence. So unimportant, so superfluously minute, they almost remind us of PPP, clerk of this parish. Thus does famine of intelligence alternate with waste. Selection, order, appears to be unknown to the professor. In all bags the same imbroglio, only perhaps in the bag Capricorn, and those near it, the confusion a little worse confounded. Close by a rather eloquent oration on receiving the doctor's hat, Lie-wash bills, marked Bezahalt settled. His travels are indicated by the street advertisements of the various cities he has visited, of which street advertisements, in most living tongues, here is perhaps the completest collection extant. So that if the closed volume itself was too like a chaos, we have now, instead of the solar luminary that shoots still it, the airy limbo, which by intermixture will farther volatilize and discompose it, as we shall perhaps see it our duty. Ultimately, to deposit these 6 paperbacks in the British Museum, farther description and all vituperation of them may be spared. Biography or autobiography of Teufelsdröckh there is, clearly enough, none to be gleaned here. At most some sketchy, shadowy, fugitive likeness of him may, by unheard of efforts, partly of intellect, partly of imagination, on the side of editor and of reader, rise up between them, only as a gaseous, chaotic appendix to that aqueous, chaotic volume can the contents of the 6 bags hover round us, and portions thereof be incorporated with our delineation of it. Daily and nightly does the editor sit with green spectacles deciphering these unimaginable documents from their perplexed cursive shrift, collating them with the almost equally unimaginable volume which stands in legible print over such a universal medley of high and low, of hot, cold, moist, and dry, is he here struggling by union of like with like, which is method to build a firm bridge, travelers. Never perhaps since our first bridge builders' sin. And death built that stupendous arch from hell gate to the earth, did any pontifex or pontiff undertake such a task as the present editor. For in this arch too, leading, as we humbly presume, far other words than that grand primeval one, the materials are to be fished up from the weltering deep and down from the simmering air, here one mass, there another, and cunningly cemented while the elements boil beneath. Nor is there any supernatural force to do it with, but simply the diligence and feeble thinking faculty of an English editor endeavoring to evolve, print in chaos, patiently, under these incessant toils and agitations, does the editor, dismissing all anger, see his otherwise robust health declining, some fraction of his allotted natural sleep nightly leaving him, and little but an inflamed nervous system to be looked for. What is the use of health or of life if not to do some work therewith? And what work nobler than transplanting foreign thought into the barren domestic soil? Except, indeed, planting thought of your own, which the fewest are privileged to do. Wild as it looks, this philosophy of clothes, can we ever reach its real meaning, promises to reveal new coming eras, the first dim rudiments and already budding germs of a nobler era in universal history. Is not such a prize worth some striving? Forward with us, courageous reader, be it towards failure or towards success. The latter thou sharest with us. The former also is not all our own. The end. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey, the characters, and the world they carried with them. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. Your support helps keep these stories alive and allows more timeless books to be shared with listeners around the world. Until next time, thank you for listening.